Hello everyone, and thanks again for joining us for Saturday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm Dave Percy, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service, and I'll be hosting today's show. And the first graphic we have is fire danger. And kind of a redevelopment. We had high fire danger show up now on the western north slope, and actually some extreme fire danger there in and around, I think, east of Buckland and near the Selawik Valley area, surrounded by high fire danger in a small area there. They've had some wetting rains around that general location, but I believe it's kicked into the extreme due to the gusty winds they've had up there. Nome, for example, seeing winds gusting 36 miles an hour as that frontal system to the west advances. Also, kind of back into the very high fire danger for the upper Yukon Valley there, the Yukon Flats, either side of the river, and just a small zone of extreme fire danger in that location. Otherwise, everywhere else looking really good as far as any fires igniting, let alone getting out of control. And for the hazardous weather graphics, we still have flood warnings are still out for the Chena River upstream of Nordell Road, and that continues out, I believe, until 7:30 this evening. And then the one for the Tanana River at Tanana, that flood warning remains out through Monday afternoon. And otherwise, on the chart or on the graphic here, we've got the yellow shaded area that signifies a wind advisory there for the passes of the Brooks Range, eastern Brooks Range, looking at winds gusting to 50 miles an hour. And that's out for the period of, I believe it was 4 a.m. Sunday to 4 p.m. Sunday. And from there, no other watches or warnings are out around the remainder of the state. And looking at satellite, you can see a couple storm systems. One that's been centered over the Russian Far East the last day or so, and that's pushing a front into the Bering Strait and St. Lawrence Island area. And some moisture getting as far east as Nome, carrying light rain, and then the gusty winds in advance of that across the western and northwest interior areas, with, as I mentioned, Kotzebue seeing gusts of 36 miles an hour out of the southeast. Nome also had a wind gust of 36 miles an hour. And then down to the south, a system pushing across the Alaska Peninsula and into Bristol Bay, spreading rain with it northeastward. And pretty windy conditions associated with that as well. Nothing really strong, but Alaska Peninsula having winds gusting 40 to 50 miles per hour this afternoon, with Cold Bay having the 50 mile an hour wind gust. Otherwise, clouds increase now. Cloudy Kodiak Island with rain should start at any time if it hasn't already, especially on the southwest side of the island. Clouds spreading into southern Cook Inlet after a sunny start to the day, mostly high clouds, but a lot of sunshine over the Susitna Valley, south central Alaska, and northward into the Yukon Flats. And also for the Copper River Basin, where temperatures rose in the lower 70s in some locations today, right down to the North Gulf Coast. And showers are on the decrease there over the southern southeast coast. Remaining amounts are quite light, nothing heavy, and also the precipitation of that low pressure area or the storm system pushing into Bristol Bay, really not a lot. Actually, Atka had a 24-hour amount of 0.2 of an inch. Otherwise, mostly looking at anywhere from nothing to maybe 10 or 15 hundredths of an inch of precipitation. So not a real rain producer there, the southern one. The one to the north, a little more of a rain producer. Gamble at about 1/10 of an inch, and Wales picked up 12 hundredths of an inch, Nome about 0.15 inches. And even those amounts aren't really significant. So moving on, or again, looking at the eastern interior, dry and mostly sunny with the warmest temperatures today. That all due to the ridge of high pressure that was off to the southwest. That kind of built up last night and shifted eastward over the central interior today. Timing was right then for sunshine, south central Alaska. Again, temperatures, as I mentioned, Big Lake rising to 73 degrees. And other locations in the Susitna Valley, and as well as East Anchorage, the Kenai Peninsula mostly sunny. But again, clouds increasing there, Kodiak Island, and the rain and wind, St. Lawrence Island, up along the northwest coast. Isolated thunderstorms broke out along that weak trough up over the eastern Brooks Range, and a couple of strikes, I'll say east of Chicken, really along the border on into Canada. So as far as thunderstorms go, not really much action in that regard. And then the trough sliding southeastward over across the Panhandle, you've got showers really scattering out and tapering off as you go up the coastline there. And the front along the Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula tonight will push eastward with a pretty good trough, a sharp trough behind the front across the Alaska Peninsula. That'll keep rain, fog, and drizzle there from the Fox Islands, and rain definitely for Kodiak Island, and then rain chances are pretty good from the areas from Bristol Bay northward to the western Arctic coast, and that'll push into southern Cook Inlet later tonight, southern Kenai Peninsula, across the Kuskokwim Valley, and maybe a few showers in the Susitna Valley, but the eastern interior remains dry, as well as the Panhandle will be dry. And then for Sunday, isolated thunderstorms there on the east and northeast edge of that moisture field that's covering just about all of western Alaska from the western Arctic coast all the way down to Kodiak Island, and then up along the North Gulf Coast, southern Alaska. Cloudy, cool, and wet tomorrow, but no heavy rains anticipated. Partly sunny for the southeast coast, and partly sunny Tanana Valley. Even the North Slope probably will see some sunshine. Bering Sea, a weak trough with some moisture spreading toward the Pribilofs. And then on Monday, the interior, cloudy, cool, wet, areas of rain pretty widespread. Showers Cook Inlet, showers Bristol Bay inland areas there to about Bethel, and showers also for the lower Yukon River Valley area to the Seward Peninsula. Otherwise, kind of rainy everywhere else except the upper Tanana Valley, especially 40-mile country there. Eagle southward toward the Brooks Range, toward the Alaska Range. Not so much in the way of precipitation, and looks pretty showery again for the Panhandle with those troughs that continue to come down the coastline there from the north and northwest. And then gale force winds and increasing rain with that system out with the front that's just gotten onto the chart there west of Chimay-Attu. And for lows tonight, 40s to lower 50s in the interior, 30s to lower 40s along the Arctic coast, and 45 to 50 south central Alaska, mid 40s out over the Aleutians and Bering Sea, upper 40s to near 50 in the southeast coast. And then highs tomorrow, not bad up over the upper Yukon Valley, highs in the 70s, and also the North Slope could see some areas reaching 70 or into the lower 70s. Otherwise, cooler for south central Alaska with the clouds and rain, highs 50s to maybe lower 60s, and lower to mid 50s for the west and southwest interior, and in the 60s for the Panhandle. Hot lows for the following morning, which would be Monday morning, looking at lows lower 50s upper Yukon Valley, and lower 40s for the Copper River Basin, and upper 40s, lower 50s for the southeast coast, and mid 40s for the Aleutians. And that'll be followed by high temperatures on Monday afternoon. Pretty cool since we're sliding in the 1st of July. I mean, there's no 70s on the chart here. Fort Yukon showing up as the warmest location in the forecast location on Monday with a high of just 66, although could be some other areas there pushing up towards 70, but that's about it. Otherwise, 50s and lower 60s with some even upper 40s. South Central Alaska, 55 to 64 possibly, and in the upper 50s to lower 60s for the southeast coast.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to flying weather. Looks like VFR to start the day Sunday along the Arctic coast, and then marginal VFR there into the western interior with IFR on its heels to southern Seward Peninsula and along the Yukon Delta coastline, Kuskokwim Delta coast, into as far east as at least Dillingham, across Togiak Bay, and then much of the Bering Sea from the Strait all the way down to the Aleutians, IFR, and IFR extends up south of the Alaska Peninsula across most of Kodiak Island, and that'll be spreading into southern Cook Inlet and Kachemak Bay by late tonight, early tomorrow morning. A band of IFR right along or just off the southeast coast. And for the afternoon, IFR really doesn't push into Cook Inlet from the south, continues to cover Kodiak Island, but pushes northeastward there to the vicinity from Cape Yakataga to just west of Yakutat. Marginal VFR, Prince William Sound, likely some IFR even slipping up into Passage Canal in the afternoon. And IFR to the western Alaska Range and southern Kuskokwim Valley up into Norton Sound. Aleutians, Bering Sea, IFR. VFR continues. Madanuska Valley, although clouds will be thickening and could go either way, who becomes marginal. Locations of the south are most likely or on the upslope areas of the Alaska Range. VFR, Upper Yukon Valley, Tanana Valley, Brooks Range, North Slope. And for Monday morning, IFR looks like northern Kobuk Valley and most of the Koyukuk Valley eastward into the Yukon Flats. And IFR, Arctic Coast, some VFR in the North Slope, and generally pretty low flying conditions Monday morning over just about all of interior Alaska, with very few areas in the VFR zone, and a lot of IFR for the southeast coast, and solid IFR for the Bering Sea, and mostly IFR for the Aleutians. And for the afternoon on Monday, we've got some VFR breaking out over the North Slope and maybe to Anatuvik and Chandelar, Coldfoot possibly, but IFR along the Arctic coast and kind of a mixture of VFR with scattered areas of marginal VFR for the interior, especially along the Alaska Range and other mountainous or hilly locations. Copper River Basin, marginal VFR with areas of IFR, northern Prince William Sound and over the Wrangell Mountains that extends in toward Yakutat, and a band of IFR over toward the eastern border of the Panhandle, otherwise marginal VFR. And Bering Sea Aleutian, same story, IFR, but marginal for the Alaska Peninsula and improving, maybe breaking out to VFR through the Bering Strait. And for passes Anatuvik and Adigan, look VFR tomorrow through Sunday. And Celine's visibility is coming down for Lake Clark and Merrill from southwest to northeast, so marginal VFR becomes IFR throughout the day. Rainy, call it marginal VFR. And for windy, VFR, increasing moisture, possibly becoming marginal VFR. And same forecast for Isabel. Look for a downward trend in conditions throughout the day, becoming marginal. Mentasta, I think only the southern entrance possibly could become marginal VFR later tomorrow afternoon. Otherwise, VFR through the pass to the north. And Tanita, VFR becoming marginal late in the afternoon. And for Portage, IFR. Chilkoot and White, VFR for one more day. Moving on to freezing levels, 4,000 feet there right across southern Alaska, but quite a gradient into the Gulf. You can see 12,000 feet there east of Kodiak, 8,000 over the eastern interior, and 2,000 to 10,000 feet out over the Bering Sea from St. Lawrence Island to the western Aleutians. As for icing, moisture could bring some zones of considerable moderate rime icing into southern Cook Inlet and possibly the western Alaska Range, and a little more likely for the Prince William Sound North Gulf Coast area, eastward to Yakutat and the Panhandle, mostly icing free through the day, as well as the Upper Tanana Valley, northeast interior, and much of the Arctic coast, as well as the Aleutians. Otherwise, areas of isolated moderate rime icing there in the shaded area from the northwest coast down in toward Kodiak Island. And the jet stream showing that stationary cold upper low there over the Russian Far East, so that's putting a 100-knot westerly jet in the northwest Bering, diminishing to 80 knots as it turns southerly across the Seward Peninsula. And the Pacific jet, 150 knots ahead of that low over the central Aleutians, aimed right at Kodiak over the ridge, and 9,000 feet. Pretty strong winds at this level of elevation, up to 55 knots for Kodiak, and 3,000 feet, about the same pattern. Turbulence, areas of moderate chop.
Technology. It's the rhythm of our everyday life. We're more dependent on satellite and communication systems than at any other time in history. Disruptions can affect our economy and even our safety. To prepare for the effects of such events and minimize impacts, we need to look outside our atmosphere, some 93 million miles away, at a star we call the Sun. It's our main energy source. It warms the Earth and grows our food. While the sun and the space between may seem pleasant from our perspective, it's anything but peaceful. At its surface exists a chaotic state of eruptions and radiation. And unlike Vegas, what happens at the sun doesn't stay at the sun.
Space weather is essentially emissions from the sun, radiation, magnetic field that erupts from the solar surface, pumped out into space, sometimes right towards Earth. When it impacts the Earth, it impacts our technology. That's what we call space weather.
These solar events and their effects at Earth can disrupt systems we take for granted. From causing blackouts to the power grid, to delaying offshore drilling operations due to inaccurate GPS data. Interference with communication systems can force air traffic to reroute and impact rescue response and coordination. Outside our atmosphere, solar radiation can harm astronauts and the systems they depend on. The good news is that these eruptions can be detected early. Forecasters at the NOAA Space Weather Prediction Center in Boulder, Colorado, have their eyes on the sun at all times.
The Space Weather Prediction Center is part of the National Weather Service and is very much like a normal weather forecast office. We're here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We're looking at data, we're looking at imagery, we're looking at model outputs. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches of imminent activity to our customers so they can take action.
In many ways, forecasting space weather is a lot like forecasting hurricanes. Those who rely on space weather forecasts, like electric power grid managers, are informed early on and can begin taking protective action.
When we see an eruption on the sun, space weather forecasters will issue a watch. This is much like a hurricane watch. When a hurricane sits offshore of Miami, for example, perhaps 48 hours out, we too can see way in advance that something may be coming towards the Earth.
As the storm moves toward us, it hits a monitoring spacecraft orbiting 1 million miles away from Earth.
It's kind of our buoy sitting out there offshore, and that hurricane about 30, 45 minutes before it makes landfall, we'll get the measurements from the buoy. That's what this spacecraft does for us. That big eruption that left the sun hits the spacecraft. Now we've got the measurements of exactly what's going to impact us here on Earth, and we issue the warnings to give the power grid a heads up that the storm is now imminent. An interesting element to this whole process is that when the forecasters issue the alert, the power grid receives the alert, takes the necessary actions to protect the grid, and the average citizen never knows anything ever happened.
The number of customers who rely on space weather information continues to grow. As our reliance on technology increases, so will our need for constant monitoring of the sun.
Space weather affects technologies. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches to our customers so they can take action.
GPS has changed society. Most people don't realize how remarkable and how many different applications there are.
The GPS has become an integral part, not just of our daily lives as far as cell phones and guidance for our cars and mapping, but the whole system in agriculture is really relying heavily on high accuracy GPS.
So they're using GPS to plant those seeds with centimeter accuracy. And then they can come behind it and irrigate and fertilize right where that seed is with that 1 centimeter accuracy.
The GPS creates a line for the operator that he can steer along, or you go to another level and the operator doesn't steer anymore and the tractor has an automatic steering system on it, much like a cruise control on a car, except for when I push the button it doesn't drive a set speed. When I push a button it stays on a predefined line.
You don't even need lights. You can do it at nighttime. You program your GPS and it's driving that tractor for you. So it's huge, and it's changing the way that the farmers farm the fields.
6 or 7 days out.
There's an interest in GPS applications from space weather side because when the sun is eruptive, it causes GPS to falter, and in some cases it doesn't work at all.
Productivity may suffer to a certain degree in that there's no way that I as a human being can steer as good 8 hours a day as a GPS system's going to do. It's going to be the same all day long. Some of the other application technologies, those are going to be gone. We're not going to have the ability to do good section control on sprayers and planters and fertilizer applicators without GPS.
We see a huge growing customer base in so many different industries, so many different sectors now relying on GPS and high precision GPS. They're all big customers for us.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Looking at the coastal water forecast for the southern coast of the Panhandle. Northwesterlies 20 to as high as 25 knots, so small craft advisories, especially along the coast offshore of Prince of Wales Island. Otherwise, the north coast, westerlies at 15. And northwest 10 for Clarence Strait, Stevens Passage southwest at 10. Small craft advisories for Lynn Canal, southerlies 25 knots, seas 5 feet. And moving on to Monday, Lynn Canal, south winds at 20 with 10-foot seas. And also for Clarence Strait, we're looking at northwest winds at 10 knots. South or all along the coastline, westerlies at 20 knots, pretty uniform both for wind speed and wave height, with seas running 9 to 10 feet. And for Sunday, Prince William Sound, east winds 20 knots, seas 4 feet. And for the North Gulf Coast, eastern North Gulf Coast, Middleton Island Zone, southeast winds 35 knots, and southeast 20 for the western North Gulf Coast. Small craft advisories both for the Barren Islands and Kamishak Bay. For Kamishak Bay, southeast 30, and the Barrens south at 25. Southern Cook Inlet east at 20, north of the Forelands, northeast at 15. And then on Monday, winds swing around to the southwest, about 20 knots for northern Cook Inlet. Southern Cook Inlet, small craft advisories, southwest 25. And then small craft advisories for Kamishak Bay, the Barren Islands, and the western north coast for west winds at 25 knots with 7 to 8 foot seas. And for Prince William Sound, light westerlies at 10 with 2 foot seas. And moving on to Kodiak Island, south to southwest winds at 20 to 25 knots. And then from Sitkinak to Cape Sarachev, south to southwest winds at 25 to 30 knots with seas as high as 17 feet. Small craft advisories on the Bering Sea side of the peninsula for westerlies at 25 knots, and Bristol Bay south at 15. And for Monday, Alaska Peninsula, southwest winds 20 to 25 knots, Bristol Bay southwest at 25. Small craft advisories for Kodiak Island for 25 knot winds from the west on the east side and southwest for Shelikof Strait, and seas 7 to 11 feet. Fox Islands tomorrow, small craft advisories, westerlies 25 knots, seas 7 to 14 feet. Adak and Atka, west-southwest at 25 with 7 to 8 foot seas, and then southwest winds 25 knots all the way out to Shimian at 2 from Adak. Looking ahead to Monday, Again, gale warnings come into the picture there for the western Aleutians from Kiska Island westward due to the approaching frontal system. It's still a fair distance west of Shemya. Otherwise, southwest 25 for Adak and Atka. Small craft advisories there. And the Fox Islands, kind of mostly a southerly component or southwest component of the wind speed of 20 to 25 knots, seas running 7 to 8 feet. And for the southwest coast, south of Nunivak Island, southwest at 20 knots, and that wind direction speeds extends to the Pribilof Islands. West 20 knots for St. Matthew Island, and that wind direction and speed extends to the Yukon Delta coast. Southwest 20 for St. Lawrence Island. Southwest 20 again for St. Lawrence Island, the next couple of days there through Monday. And for the southwest coast, we've got south to southwest winds running 20 knots with 5-foot seas. Southerly winds at 20 knots to the Pribilofs and seas 7 feet. And southwest 20 for St. Matthew Island with 6-foot seas. And for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, east winds 20 knots. That'll extend westward to and include the central coast, dropping down to 15 on the west side, and south winds at 20 knots from Wales to up to Cape Thompson. And for Monday, Wales to Cape Thompson, southwest breeze at 10. Otherwise, the strongest winds in the forecast are on the western Arctic coast there for east winds at 20 knots. Otherwise, east 15 for the central and east side. And for tonight, wet weather with a couple of frontal systems and a couple of low centers that begin to take over the weather pattern of the western part of the state. And rain will spread into Cook Inlet. And then for tomorrow, looks pretty wet, central interior westward out to the coast and across all of southern Alaska, cool wet with showers. And then for Monday, all of the interior looks pretty wet now, and that extends all the way up to the Brooks Range. Could see some sun, though, on the north slope, but areas of rain pretty widespread in the interior, or showers around the outer edge of that. Showers of the Panhandle. Gale force winds and rain push into the far western Aleutians.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.